Hey, speaking of the horror taking place right under our nose, the Micah Beckwith scandal factory keeps pumping out the hits. This week, our guy Micah in the news with at least two scandals. So we're going to start with the first one here earlier in the week. So, um, during a town hall in Terre Haute, Micah Beckwith said, quote, undocumented immigrants don't have a right to see a judge. They're here illegally. Uh, Ross, you're a criminal defense attorney. Does that comport with the Constitution?
Well, obviously not. It clearly does not, and it also doesn't comport with basic common sense. And I've had this conversation with numerous people um, about how due process works, and it's one of those knee jerk things that I think a person who doesn't think about it or doesn't really get it. That, well, yeah, they're illegal. If you came here illegally, why do you want protection now? But when you ask the question, well, if they come for you and say that you are illegal, how are you going to? Well, I'm a citizen. I have rights. How are you going to assert those rights? Well, I'm going to tell the judge. That, sir, is due process.
Yep.
So if a guy without a name, without a badge, wearing a mask comes to you and says you're here illegally, or just you're coming with me, um, and we say, hey, you don't have any rights because we've decided you're illegal. I mean, that's where we get to it. Who decided? Some kid who just got hired by ICE decided. So it's very circular, and you can see people's brains go. It's like, well, I would prove I I have a birth certificate. I don't have anything to worry about. But of course, you do because you have to be able to present that evidence yourself. So Micah Beckwith is an idiot. He's not qualified to talk about these kind of things. He's just not, even though I don't think due process is a particularly complicated legal concept, but it's clearly over his head. So yeah, it's very disturbing. And I mean, I've said publicly with something like this, if this isn't the kind of thing that scares you, um, I mean, in very real Orwellian terms, that someone can just be grabbed off the street based on what Christy Nome decided, and that's the end. You're going to the gulag. It should scare the hell out of everybody. But yeah, really disturbed by it. I think everybody should be outraged by it, both by the fact that Micah Beckwith is a fascist, but also that he is an idiot.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny for somebody who is both an elected official and a pastor. He doesn't seem to understand a whole lot about either the Constitution or the Bible. So the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution reads, in part, quote, "No person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of the law." Um, Now, tell me if I'm wrong. I think, Brianna, what this essentially is doing is stating that they, Beckwith, Trump, Braun, these fascists, don't think that these undocumented people are persons.
I think that's how you'd have to read it because otherwise they'd be protected by the Constitution, which they are. And the Supreme Court has upheld this twice. So I don't understand. Like Micah Beckwith, he is the special kind of village idiot, if you will, because he cannot figure
Special
out
kind.
how to Google anything because this literally takes 3 seconds to Google. And unless he is classifying people who are undocumented not as humans, there's no way to interpret this. The Supreme Court has ruled, and it's very obvious to the rest of us that due process is afforded to everyone, regardless of citizenship. So that's the only way this makes logical sense, is if they are considering people who are undocumented not human.
Uh, yeah, 100%. And listen, Micah Beckwith doesn't need Google. He gets his answers directly from God. And apparently, God told him that this would be a good comeback during this town hall. Beckwith says, "So, when the Japanese were bombing Pearl Harbor, did we give them due process to actually see a judge? They invaded our country. Illegal migrants who have broken our laws and crossed into our country illegally do not receive constitutional due process rights merely for invading our soil. If that were true, that would mean if Russia invaded Alaska, Russian soldiers would be required to receive constitutional rights also. This is absurd. Constitutional rights are not bestowed upon individuals simply because their feet are on our soil. Uh, Scott, why is that horseshit?
So the reason why this is horseshit, it ties into the broader agenda. Trump is an old school racist. Beckwith and Braun clearly fall into the same categories, and they're using this as a way to justify anyone who doesn't look like one of us on this podcast as going to a gulag. And the way you do this is, this is straight out of Goebbels, Joseph Goebbels, Hitler's Minister of Propaganda playbook. Is you pick a villain and you demonize them, and that's how you do it. This is how you get people to show up for lynching parties. It's horseshit. It's illegal. It's against the Constitution. And with Trump having now spent 180 days violating the Constitution, it clearly isn't worth the paper that it was scrawled on.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to make it so that everyone in the country looks like one of us. And I'm sorry, my America is diverse. My America has all ethnicities, all genders, all persuasions of religion. I'm sorry, that's what we built this country for. That's why we have that statue in New York Harbor.
And it sounded to me like he was defending Japanese internment camps during World War II.
He
And
absolutely was.
suggesting that was something we should be doing again. Like, he's talking about Russian soldiers. Those are soldiers. But we're talking about, you know, a military invasion. It's not the same as people seeking refuge in another country. It is
It's not.
absurd. It is offensive. It is
So
racist.
we also have a set of rules. The Geneva Convention, for example, which we've signed on to. We also have the Code of Military Justice. Look, yes, a captured Russian soldier in Alaska has rights. We cannot shoot him in the head and throw him in a ditch. We can't. So even that, I was kind of waiting for Micah Beckwith to go, Bluto from Animal House and ask if it was over when the Germans bombed Pearl Harbor. But no, I mean it's ridiculous. But even there, yes, I don't want to keep quoting movies, but this isn't Nam Smokey. There are rules, and even there, he's wrong. So try as he might to justify fascism, that's not what we have. I mean, I hope. I mean, and the biggest fear is we have a U.S. Supreme Court that continues to surprise us again and again and again as just how far they are willing to go. And it can be a gamble for these folks to say, look, we know it's unconstitutional, but the Constitution is whatever the Supreme Court says. And I think, 2 years ago, if you would have said the president of the United States has complete immunity, even if he murders someone, you would have said, well, that's not true. That's ridiculous. But that's the law of the land today. So that should also give us